If I could sit down with my teenage self, what would I tell them about being Hindu? That's why today I want to share the lessons that I wish someone had told me when I was a teenager, figuring out how to live an authentic Hindu life in this modern world. And I want you to stay with me until the end because I'll share the hardest lesson of all. And it has something to do with a huge influence on Indo-Caribbean culture and something that many within the wider Hindu community are oblivious to. So as a teen, I thought spiritual practices were for later in life, something you did when you got older or maybe when you had kids. But the truth is, spiritual practice is like exercise, and I wish I had known that. The earlier you start, the stronger your foundation becomes. When I was younger, I started regular prayer when I was in high school, but only because I felt like I needed to get something from it. And I struggled with public speaking and giving presentations at school. So every morning, what did I do? I woke up and I prayed to Ma Saraswati to help me with my speech. Now, yes, I did attend Mandir regularly, and I've spoken about this in previous videos. But that certainly wasn't the same as sitting down, closing your eyes, and focusing to say your mantras. Looking back, I wish I had lit a diya every morning, even if it was for 30 seconds. Not as a transaction though, not because I wanted something, but just for the sake of it. When I got married, those spiritual practices did take a backseat because we're starting our lives, and it certainly wasn't something regular that I did. And as with most people, it wasn't until I got much older that my personal practices solidified. And just like with exercise, you don't get results overnight. As a teenager, I thought that one big act would make me spiritual. So if I fasted or if I prayed really intensely for one night, that somehow I would catch up. But that's not how a Hindu life works. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You need to show up every day, even if it's something small. I remember fasting the first time for Mahashivratri, hoping it would bring me closer to Bhagwan Shiva. And then I broke my fast early because I had a headache and I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like a failure. What I know now is that it's not about that one extreme effort. It's about the small, steady discipline that you make in your life. And if I had understood this earlier, I would have been a lot easier on myself. Because it's not about being perfect, but it's about growing in your own lifetime. And part of that growth is building a real relationship with the divine, something I did wait a little long to do. I didn't know how to form a relationship with Bhagwan, with the divine. No matter how much I attended Mandir, Hindu deities were some abstract idea, far away from where I was and what I was doing within my life. What I wish I knew then is that Bhagwan isn't far away. And deities are not these abstract ideas or figures. They are your closest companions. I could have spoken to Hanumanji about my struggles. I could have asked Ma Durga for strength when I felt small. And I didn't realize until much later that they were there, they were very real, waiting for me to reach out. I only looked to them out of a type of fear that if I didn't say this mantra, something bad will happen to me. It's only now that I realize that the earlier you start that friendship, that relationship, the more it guides you through life. So talk to them. After you say your mantras, after your sadhana, really talk to them and leave it all bare on the table. The hard part though is that growing up in a Hindu household, there was also something that made this relationship harder. In my house, and in the wider community too, we use the word God a lot. But that word God came from a Christian influence, not from our own tradition. And for me, it created years of confusion. I remember attending satsang at Mandir, and pundits would say we need to pray to God. And of course, the most infamous line of all, God is one. But what did that really mean? Was it the same God of Christianity or Islam? A different God? Was it many gods? This led to so much confusion. I must say for myself though, full credit goes to Rajiv Malhotra and his book Being Different, which opened my eyes to the language needed to express the differences that we have. And as soon as I read it, everything made perfect sense. If I had learned that earlier, to say Bhagawan, to say Devi, to say Deva, I would have understood things much more clearly. Those words, they carry the depth of the Hindu tradition. But using the word God made me feel like I had to fit Hinduism to some type of Christian box. It just didn't work. And that confusion about language, it only got worse when I started studying Hinduism in a formal academic setting, because the first place that many of us really go is the last place you really want to learn about Hinduism. For a lot of Hindus, university, colleges, and high school is where we first study Hinduism seriously. And that's a problem, because academia often carries biases. They might be subtle or not so subtle. And if you don't already know your tradition, you inherit that bias as truth. I didn't have Bal Vikas growing up here. My parents were busy building the community, and the resources weren't really there. So when I picked up my first book on Hinduism from a university class that my brother had signed up for, I thought, okay, this is what Hinduism is really about. But it didn't sound like the Hinduism that I grew up with. There was this gap between what I was reading and what I had lived. Even those who did attend Bal Vikas mostly learned mantras, which is important. But when you get older, you need the philosophy, you need the depth. And if academia is your first real teacher, you miss that foundation. And replacing it with someone else's interpretation is wrong. And while knowledge is important, life isn't only about ideas. As a teen, I struggled with something much more practical. As a teen, dating was this minefield. It was controversial. Nobody wanted to talk about it openly. But looking back, I think if you want to live a spiritual life, where better to meet someone than the mandir or your local community? Many parents of teenagers will of course frown upon dating, and while I won't get into this topic here, cultivating relationships within a spiritual environment needs to be a priority for parents. That's how traditions continue. Meeting someone who shares your values, your dharma, your way of life. I wish someone had told me that this was okay. Because if your spiritual path matters to you, then your partner should come from that world too. And finally, the hardest lesson of all, one I only realized years later. It has to do with something massive in Indo-Caribbean culture. Something that shaped my parents, that shaped me, and probably shaped all of us. And that's the entertainment culture I grew up surrounded by. Bollywood. It was everywhere. It was at weddings, in the car, on the radio, and for my parents and almost everyone from the Caribbean, it was their connection to India. For me, it was the soundtrack of my childhood. But what I didn't realize as a teen was how often it quietly misrepresented Hinduism. Sometimes it was subtle, and sometimes it was obvious. Movies like Hum Saath Saath Hai and Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, it turned Hinduism into lavish weddings and pretty rituals, but no depth. The heroes would stroll into a temple like they were doing God a favor. There was no true devotion. Then comedies like Mujhse Shaadi Karogi, they made pundits into these greedy or bumbling idiots. And big life lessons came from churches or mosques, never from a mandir. And when a lost or poor child needed saving, it was almost a kindly priest, rarely a Hindu family. You don't realize the effect this has on your psyche of your everyday Hindu. I absorbed all of this without question, and it took years before I could look back and say, wait, this thing that was so central to our Indo-Caribbean identity was also distorting how I understood my own tradition. And that realization came late. I wish it had come earlier. So those are 7 things I wish I knew as a Hindu teen. Now, maybe you're still figuring it out. Maybe you're trying to guide your own kids, or maybe you're reconnecting after years away from the Hindu tradition. Wherever you are, I hope these lessons remind you of one thing. Living a Hindu life is a journey. It's never too late to start walking it. Today, when my kids ask me questions about Dharma, I give them the answers I wish someone had given me. Because I don't want them to wait until they're 30 or 40 or 50 to realize things I have only just learned. I want them to start now. Thank you very much for watching. Please do watch this next video right over here, and I'll catch you in the next one. Om Shanti.